What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets Central podcast, episode number 83. As we are here to discuss a series win for the first time in what feels like decades. So, we got a lot to get into in this one. Definitely some good. Still some things that you watch throughout the series and you're like, okay, these things still need to be cleaned up. But nonetheless, it is nice to see them actually get in the win column and nice to see them surprise us when we had no expectations because honestly, that was really the best part about going into the series in a way. It's like we have no expectations of this. So go in there and prove us wrong, like we said. They proved us wrong, taking 2 out of 3. They honestly could have swept the series had they not have a huge meltdown in game number 1 in this series. So things starting to get on the right track at least a little bit here to be more of like this is where the problem is, which we'll talk throughout this episode, is there feels like there are things that tell us could this just be a mediocre team or a slightly above average team? We're going to talk about that in deep dive, why we might feel that way, and all the other stuff. Before we jump into everything, I ask that you please leave a like on your way into the live show, or if you're watching on replay, subscribe if you guys are new to the channel, especially if you're Met fans, and turn on your post notifications so you know when we upload or go live here. But yeah, Matt, we got proven wrong. How are we feeling after they again finally take a series?
Miracles apparently do happen. They apparently do happen because not only did the Mets beat one of the better teams in the AL West, but they're on a winning streak now. It's only a 2-game winning streak, but it's something. And I guess with how bad this team has played right now, it's all about baby steps right now. And on a winning streak, they win the series, which, like we talked about in the last podcast, we had no expectation for. We thought that they would probably get swept or at least lose the series 2 out of 1. But hey, they took it. And look, at the end of the day, is it a little bit disappointing considering, like you said, that they could have swept this series, but you had the whole bullpen implosion in game 1 of the series, which we'll end up talking about that more. But listen, obviously we'll talk about it, but the second game, the biggest headline was Noel McLean came up from AAA, made his debut, and not only made his debut, but he looked good and maybe possibly could he have injected some fresh new life into this Mets team? Who knows? Well, it's only 1 game, and like I said, they're on a 2-game winning streak, but we have to see a bigger sample size of that before we can fully come to that conclusion. And then, yeah, yesterday's game, the Little League Classic in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, was a nice little event there for the Little League players. But yeah, the Mets put on an offensive show. They actually beat up on one of the better pitchers in baseball, George Kirby, which was nice to see because usually we know how those games go. This offense usually gets shut down, or there'll be an inning where they have the opposing pitcher on the ropes and then they end up letting him off the hook and then they end up losing that game. But yeah, nice to see an overall good bounce back performance, especially from Clay Holmes as well, which is something that we've talked about plenty of times on here. And yeah, listen, the only thing I'll say is I don't want to be a deadbeat downer because I've seen a bunch of people online say, "Oh, are the Mets back? Are we backing on the Mets?" And listen, do I want to be backing on the Mets? Do I want to believe yes? But I have to see so much more from this team. I have to see a lot more evidence before I can fully come to the conclusion of are the Mets are back because like we've talked about, we've seen 2.5 months of just awful, dreadful baseball. So one series win is not going to change my mind on that. I need to see a lot more before, I could be proven wrong that this team maybe can compete for a World Series. And there's still so many more questions that need to be answered before, like you said, before I even come to the conclusion. But the one positive is when you look at the upcoming schedule, they have a chance now to build momentum. And this was something that we talked about when the Mets split the Brave series back in late June. We said, okay, looking at the upcoming schedule, you had a nice little split against the Braves. Go into Pittsburgh, build momentum. And we all know how that series went. They not only got swept, but they got completely embarrassed by one of the worst teams in baseball. But now looking at this, okay, you beat the Mariners, you take 2 out of 3, you go into Washington, who statistically are one of the worst teams in baseball this year. Like I said on the postgame show, you said, do they have some young talent? Yes, but comparing this team side by side to the Nationals, the Mets are easily the better team. So go into Washington, win that series, And then, of course, after that, you head to the House of Horrors known as Truist Park in Atlanta, and then we'll see what happens there. But the Mets now, if they want to get back on track, the schedule is more in their favor. And not only do they have to win games right now, just because, of course, you want to cut back down on the lead that the Phillies have, but you also want to extend the lead or extend the gap between them and the Reds because it's only 1.5 games. And right now, that little comfort zone has gotten way too close for comfort. So they need to start winning games and extend that lead over the Reds quickly.
Yeah, and I talked about it when I did my post game, I believe after the Nolan McLean game. Yeah, it was that game that it seems like maybe, and again, I don't want it to be because of what happened with Zach Wheeler, and it's very unfortunate what happened with him, and I hope he has a speedy recovery. But we also have to look at this from a baseball standpoint at the same time and sit here and say, that opens an opportunity again for the Mets to try to potentially win the division. I mean, we talked about it nauseum that they have a lot of games still against the Phillies. And if this team could start to actually find a little bit of a rhythm here and take care of business against the Phillies, which should be an easier task when you're not going to face Zach Wheeler potentially in any of these games, because I'd imagine he's not going to be back anytime soon, unfortunately, for his sake, of course. And I just hope he ends up getting healthy. But yeah, this is an opportunity for the Mets to right some of the wrongs from pretty much the entire season. And, I'm with, you know, some of the comments here in the chat, like the series win is papering over the cracks of inconsistency. 2 wins in a row is not a big deal, but it has to start somewhere. Factors it from McLean's performance and Lindor smoking the ball. I like their chances. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that I feel one way or the other because, like I said, there are things where I could sit here and say, okay, it is absolutely a huge positive that Francisco Lindor is playing at the MVP level that we saw at the end of last season. Francisco Alvarez, hopefully he's okay, which that worries me now, but he had an unbelievable series here against the Mariners. And as long as he's healthy, which again, up in the air because he's known to have a lot of injuries with his hand. So again, I really hope it's nothing long term because he was really finding a rhythm. And there was a comment about that as well with an OPS over 800. The fact that he raises OPS to as high as he has after the piss poor start that he had is just unbelievable. And they need his bat in the lineup. So as long as it's nothing long term for him, that's another thing that's a huge positive. But then you still have your negatives. Like, okay, there are certain things with the hitting approach where I'm still not seeing enough adjustments. Like Alvarez is doing a good job at the plate in terms of getting those extra base hits and pulling the ball and everything. But I'm still watching Brandon Nimmo, going the opposite field a little too much on middle pitches. I'm watching Pete Alonso still strike out at an obnoxious clip, swinging at pitches in the opposing batter's box. So like, there's and then the defense too, like Mark Vientos not being able to play a good third base. And like Carson phrased it, looks like he chugged NyQuil before playing third base yesterday. And then on top of that, Mike Sarbaugh is still having way too many blips as the third base coach. So, you know, I'm sitting here like this is where I have the feeling of what I said in the opening, where it's like, is this team kind of just average to above average? Because when they're firing on all cylinders, sure, like you get the wins like you got last night, and you sneak by with some wins like you did in game number 2 in the series. But at the same time, it's like you still have the miscues. And then I didn't even mention Lindor too yesterday in that game, routine fly ball to him and he ends up not being able to catch it. So it's like there's still those little details where I'm just not I'm not convinced enough to where I could sit here and say, okay, this team could all of a sudden is back and like the World Series quest is on the table here. I need to see a hell of a lot more. And then even base running too with Lindor, like last night gets caught sleeping over at first base. It's like some of these things still have to be cleaned up.
100%, absolutely 100%. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway from from last night's game was more the fact that they were at least better with runners in scoring position. They were 5 for 15, which is still not great, but it's better. But as we've talked about, and it's like cool. They put up 7 runs again against one of the better pitchers in the league in George Kirby, but how sustainable is that? And that more goes in line with the fact with how badly they've been playing with because even like we're talking about it right now, it's like okay, like could the Mets possibly be back? But like we said, for us, we need to see a whole a lot more evidence before we can even come to that conclusion. And again, that factors into the runners in scoring position because again, 5 for 15, it's better. But is that going to carry over into the next game? 7 runs, okay, that's nice. Is that going to carry over into the next game? Like we can never fully like when we're talking about it and discussing this team, we can never fully be confident that one aspect of this team, especially right now, is going to carry over into the next game. Like during like earlier in the season, we could say that with the pitching staff and the rotation, the bullpen, because both of those parts of this team were firing on all cylinders. But then we've seen over the last couple of months that both of those departments have severely fallen off. And hopefully, like I said, with the injection of Nolan McLean and another guy in there who could possibly, take the ball every 5 days and just give you some quality length. And then, like I said, we even saw from Clay Holmes yesterday where, okay, 5 innings, still not exactly the length where you want it to be, but at least his start looked a lot more cleaner than his last couple starts, which is something that I liked. And then, Mania, exactly wasn't great. He gives up the 4 runs earlier in the Friday game, does settle down a little bit, but then even what we saw after that, the Mets go up 6-4 in that game. Bullpen implosion. Ryan Helsley, he's been terrible. Tyler Rogers hasn't been terrible, but he's been a lot more hittable than we thought, than initially we anticipated. And then, it's just, again, like we said, we need to see a lot more before we can even come to that conclusion that the Mets are so called back. But yeah, and then even before we continue on, like you mentioned, speedy recovery to Zach Wheeler. I know that he's a division rival, plays for the Phillies. We don't like the Phillies, but again, former Met. I always liked Zach Wheeler when he was here, and just unfortunate with the whole blood clot situation. So speedy recovery to him.
100% on that. And just to segue back into the conversation here, though, I mean, the other thing that is alarming that you kind of touched on a little bit with the offense is the fact where, you're still seeing the bipolar tendencies because, what I talk about in the post game after game one, once Castillo was pulled, where was the offense? Where was it? In game number two, okay, you finally got to the bullpen a little bit there, but like, still not good enough offensively from this team. And then in last night's game, it's like, okay, Kirby's out of the game. Where's the offense? Like, that's the thing where I'm still like, okay, it's great that they were able to capitalize on these starting pitchers. And I'm not going to sit here and complain about that part. But, once it goes to the bullpen, this offense, I want to see them have a step on your throat mentality where it's like, we're not letting you even get a chance to come back into this game. And I didn't like that either about last night, where it's like, Reed Garrett comes in and surrenders some of those runs. And all of a sudden, maybe the Mariners feel like they're back in the game a little bit, which, obviously it didn't matter in retrospect, but it would just be nice if this offense would, really step on other teams' throats and capitalize on the bullpen, especially when the Mariners weren't throwing their best out from their bullpen last night. It's like, could you please, capitalize a little bit off of this? So that's something that still needs to be cleaned up as well from this team, because I can tell you right now, in the playoffs, that's not going to fly because teams are going to be way more aggressive with their bullpens. They're going to be way more aggressive with pulling their starters. Like Castillo would not have stayed in the game as long as he did if this was a playoff game. And obviously the Mets wouldn't play the Mariners before someone's like, well, actually, you get my point though. If the Mets played like, for example, the Dodgers and Tyler Glasnow's struggling early and the Mets get on him, you think Dave Roberts is going to leave him out there to die? No, they're going to pull him, go to the bullpen. And if the Mets aren't going to hit off of bullpens, then you're shit out of luck. The Dodgers are going to be right in a prime spot to come back in the game. So that's something that just needs to be cleaned up. Was at least some encouraging stuff about last night with the Mets bullpen sake because Brooks Raley had a better outing. Ryan Helsley looked as good as he did in this first appearance, which was really refreshing to see because he's been horrible. But yeah, I mean, that's something that's just going to have to change because, if the bullpen blips are going to happen from this team, then, you really want to see this offense, which again, we've talked about ad nauseum. This team is built on their offense. The payroll says it. You want to see them take advantage of these bullpens.
No, 100%. The bullpen definitely looked a lot better than it has over the past couple weeks. Because I mean, Rayleigh comes out there, he gives you a quality inning. Reed Garrett, sure, he does surrender the 2-run home run to Cal Raleigh later in the game, but I really can't kill Reed Garrett too much because when you look at the pitch location, like he put a splitter low and away to Cal Raleigh, and like it was low and away, and it was completely out of the zone low. And it's just sometimes it's one of those things where you just have to tip your cap to the opposing hitter. And we know that Cal Raleigh has been one of the best hitters in baseball this year, has 47 home runs. He's on pace for 60 home runs. And it's just, like I said, it's one of those times where you just have to tip your cap to the hitter and say, hey, listen, I made my pitch. You went down there and got it. So, but again, still want to see better from Reed Garrett. Still want to see him get back to the point where we saw him earlier in the season and where he was around, July and June, where he was just, one of the top bullpen arms, in this bullpen. And then Ryan Helsley definitely looked better. Still wasn't exactly pretty to watch because looking at the pitch count, and I said this on the postgame show yesterday, it looked like a Ryan Stanek outing where it's like, okay, you see the guy, he's out there, he's chucking high velo, he's chucking 101, 102, but he's just not getting the swings and misses. And then even like on his slider/cutter, he's not exactly getting the swings and misses on that either. I know he got 2 strikeouts, but I think both of them were strikeout looking strikeouts. So a little more encouraging signs from Helsley. I do want to see him, definitely lessen up on the pitch count because, I don't want to see him go out there and, have to throw 30 to 25 pitches just to get through one inning of work. But if he could build off this, I'll take it. And then Tyler Rogers through the one inning as well, gave up the 2 hits, but he was able to get through that inning without, without any trouble either. And then even like when you look at the second game of the series and something that we've talked about before in terms of Edwin Diaz, it's like with Mendoza, use Edwin Diaz against the better part of the lineup, and that's what he did. He went to him in the 8th inning against the top part of the Mariners order, got through that part of the order fairly quick, 1, 2, 3, and then even he pushed him for a second inning, which I didn't expect, but pushed him for a second inning. Okay, gives up the home run to Eugenio Suarez, but at that point the Mets are already up 3-0. So it's like, okay, solo home run, not really that too much, not really that much, big of a deal. And then he ends up retiring the next 2 to end that game. So yeah, the bullpen, especially in the second and third game of the series, looked a lot better. First game, it was all-around disaster, but even then, like I talked about before with Mendoza again, I thought he had a decent series in this game. I know people will kind of get on him for taking out McLean before he was able to complete the 6th inning. For me, like I said, personally, would I have liked to see McLean go out there and finish the 6th inning? Yes, but I think the Mets are in this situation where, so many things have gone wrong for them in this, over this last couple months where it's like, okay, you're at a point with McLean where he's gone 5 1/3. He just struck out Randy Arozarena to get the first out of the inning. And, part of this, it's mental with rookie pitchers because I think what Mendoza wanted to do, he wanted to, let him come out of the game on a high, because if you let him face, a batter or two, potentially, whether it's Eugenio Suarez or, Josh Naylor, who I think was coming up next after he struck out Randy Arozarena, if McLean ends up throwing a bad pitch and then, all of a sudden Josh Naylor ends up hitting a home run into left field, and now all of a sudden it's a 3-3 game or a 3-2 game at that point. McLean now comes out of the game a little bit more down. The confidence is not as high. So I think Mendoza looked at the situation like, okay, McLean, he pitched a hell of a game. Come out of the game, with some confidence, and now maybe when he goes into his next start, he can be able to build off that and, let the bullpen and now let the bullpen handle it. So for me, I didn't have a problem with McLean pitch or him or with Mendoza taking him out in that situation. Like I said, would I have wanted him to finish that inning? Yes, but I think it was a smarter thing to take him out. And listen, credit to McLean because he pitched a hell of a game.
Yeah, I was now that you brought McLean up, I think we should just talk about him because being in that building for the game, the energy was so different from any game. Like I truly did forget, and I tweeted about it, how much, the ballpark vibe is different when you have a starting pitcher going out there that everyone's excited for. He was getting cheered like he was the second coming of Christ during that game. Like they kept showing him on the jumbotron at points, and everyone just went absolutely ballistic every time he was shown on the jumbotron. Anytime they just showed stat lines on the jumbotron, everyone was just giving a standing ovation. And yeah, with the decision to pull him, I think we all selfishly wanted him to go finish that sixth inning. But Mendoza also said in the post game, I mean, he basically said, it's not my decision. He basically said, upstairs, they told me, yeah, uh, they kind of told me to pull him here, which makes sense. I'd imagine his pitch limit was probably like 90 to 95 pitches, and that's where they wanted to leave him, like just beyond the confidence factor. And I'm sure that also played a role in it. So I was fine with the decision from a baseball standpoint. Selfishly, though, yeah, I mean, we all wanted to see him finish it, but huge shout out to Gregory Soto, by the way, that appeared, who went out there and just absolutely hooped, going 1 2/3 of an inning, 2 strikeouts, not allowing a hit, not allowing a walk. He has been just great for this bullpen, and having both him and Rayleigh is nice, even though Rayleigh did have the blip in game one. Uh, but yeah, I mean, with Nolan McLean, it was just beautiful to watch. And I'm not gonna lie, I have been like watching the highlights back since. The movement that he has on his sweeper was just it was a pitching wet dream. Like it truly was just beautiful to watch. And again, I just forgot what it's like to actually have a starting pitcher that you're excited to watch. And the curveball too, which he generated 5 whiffs on 11 swings, which he struggled a little bit with the command on that, I felt at times. And the other thing that sucks is that, he probably does go 6 innings if he doesn't struggle in that third inning, which that was the other thing I didn't love, which again, I'm not going to ridicule him because he still did unbelievable for a first start. But, when he was walking the 8 and 9 hitters, I'm like, this is, I don't like to see this. Like, attack these hitters. You have really good stuff. And then he locked in, started to attack hitters again after those walks. And, once he dialed back in, there was no going back for him. But yeah, I mean, small little adjustments there could come a long way. And you're probably looking at a guy that could give you 6 innings the next time he goes out there, assuming it goes accordingly. So just really encouraging to see, okay, maybe you have someone finally that could take the ball every 5 days and actually give you a productive start.
Yeah, it's nice to see someone that has confidence in their stuff, and I think I think you definitely do see that with McLean. And again, I know he got into a little bit of trouble with the command in the third inning because again, you walk J.P. Crawford, you walk Cole Young, which are both the eighth and ninth hitters respectively, and you like you said, with McLean having good stuff, you want to see or at least you want to see him go after those two guys, considering that again, both of them are the eighth and ninth hitters respectively. But listen, he got into a little bit of trouble there, and he ends up striking out Randy Arozarena. Gives up the single to Cal Raleigh to load up the bases, and then I mean that insane play that he made on Julio Rodriguez to get the inning double
That
play where
too.
he catches the ball behind his back. We heard because I was listening to because I was at work, so I was listening to the game on the radio, and Howie Rose was talking about this, which coming up through the system, McLean was notoriously a very good fielder for his position in terms of being a pitcher. But I mean, that play that he made was just disgusting. And I mean, after I came back from work and I was looking at the highlights and just coming and watching the video and looking at some of those pitches. I mean, like you said, the amount of movement and the amount of revolutions he was generating on his sweeper. I mean, that pitch has disgusting movement. I mean, like you said, I mean, what he threw that pitch 33 times got 15 swings, 4 whiffs. The curveball also threw it 19 times, 11 swings, 5 whiffs. Maybe we'd like to see the four seamer a little bit more because he only threw that 9 times. But I mean, also his sinker looked really good as well. So I mean, I can't really too much. I really can't complain too much about Nolan McLean. Like I said, I would like to see him, cut back a little bit more on the walks and improve the command. But I think that's something that's going to come along as as he develops and as he gains more confidence and as he has a couple more starts under his belt. So, but yeah, like I say, it's nice to see someone who just takes the ball every 5 days. Is able to have trust in the stuff, throws in the strike zone consistently, and has the amount of swing and miss stuff on that he has on his stuff. Which so very nice to see from Nolan McLean. And like I said, and again with McLean, I'll briefly mention this, but I don't want to put too much pressure on McLean because it's not too fair to him. I don't want to view McLean as as the savior of this team, but if he could just like I said, take the ball every 5 day, you know, give you some length, give you some solid starts, I'll gladly take that from McLean, and hopefully his next start, which is probably going to be lined up in Atlanta, you know, a place that we all know that's not a easy place for the Mets to play, but
Is it lined up in
hopefully
Atlanta? I thought it was Washington.
no, he's pitching in Atlanta. He's not pitching in Washington.
All right, I thought it was Thursday because Wednesday you said was Manaya's start, right?
Oh no! Thursday's the Mania start. I think it's Peterson tomorrow, Senga Wednesday, and then Mania Thursday.
Okay, yeah. Then I had the schedule lined up before. Okay, I
Yeah,
had that mixed up poorly then before. All right, but yeah, I in Atlanta, of course, but just some of the comments about McLean. The walks are natural because of his movement, his east-west movement. Except the curve, he's going to miss spots once in a while. It's not that he can't find the zone. I did feel he was nibbling a little bit in those particular at bats because he was missing a little bit with the sinker and the fastball. Which again, it's going to happen. I'm not going to sit here and expect perfection. That's just unrealistic to ask for. But yeah, it's something that will improve. Simple as that. I just wanted to see him attack them a little bit more with the Heat, especially because again, it's the lower part of the lineup and they haven't seen him before. But yeah, just once again, really good and pitched great. I'm interested his next start when the adrenaline from his debut isn't as high. I think if anything, that's only going to help him because first start jitters, and now you go out there and it's going to start to become second nature. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'm just excited to watch him take the ball because it is so nice to have a starting pitcher, like I said, where you are excited and you want to go to the ballpark to watch him go out there and pitch every 5 days, which we haven't had. I truly the last time, and I said in the post game, the last time I felt this way about wanting to go watch a starting pitcher was Jacob DeGrom. It has been that long outside of maybe the first month of Max Scherzer as a Met, if you want to say that. But um, I would say, I mean, DeGrom pitched that same year, so I would probably say him though.
yeah, no, no. Like I said, it's nice to have a guy that you have some, and I know we haven't seen him before, but I think everyone going to the game had some semblance of confidence in McLean just because we heard all the hype about him. We saw him; he was dominating in AAA. I believe he had like a 2.64 ERA. He was constantly giving Syracuse length. He was constantly going 6 innings. Had the occasional 7 inning starts as well. And then like we said, it's and like I brought up, it's nice to see someone who has confidence in his stuff and has the ability to just throw stuff in the strike zone and the ability to generate swings and misses. Like I said, it's only one game and it's a small sample size, but you want to see him hopefully build off this, and I've the full confidence in him that he will build off of this. But this is like something that I brought up in the post game show on for the game that he pitched, and I was in the comment section. I'm like, this and I know we've had the trouble with the starting rotation this year with not being able to give any semblance of length and with them struggling over the past 2.5 months, but this is how you build a starting rotation. You need to draft and develop your own guys and bring them through the system and have them on these cheap contracts. Because like I said, if Stearns is not going to go out there in free agency and pay these guys, and go out there and sign these big pitchers to big deals because he's scared, of the injury factor. Well, then the only other way to build a rotation and for it to be sustainable, you got to draft and develop these guys. And fortunate for the Mets, that's one of the strongest suits for their farm system. Not only they have the pitching lab, but they have a lot of solid pitching prospects that are coming up. We saw Christian Scott last year. He'll be back next year because he had the Tommy John surgery. We saw McClain make his debut. Obviously, we have Brandon Sproat, who's probably be the next in line. And then, of course, probably the one that I'm most excited for is Jonah Tong, because Tong dominated Double A this year. I believe a 1.37 ERA in Double A, insane strikeout numbers. And then he goes out there a couple days ago in his first AAA start. I believe he threw 5 1/3 innings, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts, no runs given up. So the fact that he's already making these quick adjustments in AAA already, and the fact that he's already looking as dominant as he was back in Double A, I'm very excited to see Jonah Tong up here fairly soon. Like I said, I don't think it's gonna be this year, and I don't know if he'll crack the lineup, or I don't know if he'll crack the rotation next year, but I could certainly see later in the year next year, maybe even the midway point of next season. I can certainly see Jonah Tong come up here. And like I said, this is how you build starting rotations. You got to draft and develop these guys, because you even look at the amount of pitching depth that the Dodgers have had over the last couple of years. Again, that's all about drafting and developing. And even then, if some of those guys don't become mainstays in your bullpen, you could potentially flip some of these guys for all-star quality players, in trade deadlines or in the offseason. So, but it's nice to see that some of these guys are starting to finally come through and make their debut, like McClain. And like you said, a couple more guys are on the way as well, with with Sproat and Jonah Tong.
The only frustrating part about this is, like, it only makes it more annoying that they didn't just call him up sooner. That's really the only thing that I could sit here and complain about. It's like, you watch what he did in that start. It's like, why couldn't they just make this move sooner? But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for all of these pitching prospects, especially Tong, like you said. And honestly, I was saying in our group chat, and I don't know how much they're going to want to, like, save bullets or anything like that, which would make sense, given what it is with pitching in 2025 and then, 2026 by the time Tong's probably ready. But, if he's able to have a good run down here in AAA for a bit, I really wouldn't be surprised if by next season he has a dominant spring and then maybe goes to AAA and has like 2 or 3 good starts. I wouldn't be surprised if he's called up relatively quickly next year. And, we'll obviously have to wait and see how the offseason goes next year, this winter, to see, if it lines up to where, that would make sense. But, we're not here to talk about that yet. But it is exciting to just think about, next year at some point you could have all of McClain, Tong, Sproat, and Christian Scott pitching for this team, whether it is in the starting rotation or some of these, 1 or 2 of these guys in the bullpen, which I would hope all of them are starting outside of maybe Scott, which, we talked about last year, how he might have tendencies more of a reliever, which, we'll see how he rehabs and everything, and maybe it will suit him well. But yeah, it's just like so exciting to think about how you could save money in this regard. And then, for the offense, it gives you more flexibility to add. It gives you more flexibility to potentially add a top end starting pitcher at some point to pair with these young guys as well. Because instead of spending, the money you are on Mania, Montas, Holmes, you could go out there, and Senga, I guess you could throw in that regard. You could go out there and sign a legit frontline starter because you're saving so much money with all of these young starting pitchers. So, obviously it all has to formulate into place before we get to that point. But, you know, we'll see how it progresses. But I can tell you right now, there is a world that I'm envisioning in 2026, 27, which I'm not going to talk about here, in 2025 in August. But it's just nice to think about these sort of things in that regard.
No, 100%. And the Mets haven't had this amount of youth and prospect wise, this much excitement in terms of the pitching staff, since 2015. And I know that rotation exactly didn't work out as well as it did because a bunch of those guys just got screwed with a bunch of injuries. And I know DeGrom was able to fully flourish, and then Zach Wheeler, it took a little bit, and then he fully flourished once he left the Mets and went to Philly. But Matz really hasn't worked out to his full potential. Harvey, he really just fell apart after the 2015 season, and then Syndergaard, he just completely fell off the map as well. And I don't even know what the hell he's. I think he's reading books probably right now with his book club, but
Getting ready for September's alumni game.
yeah, getting ready for September's alumni game. But it's nice to see that, and really, on the pitch on the position side is too. It's like, this is and I know we've had criticisms of Stearns this year in terms of not firing guys, not holding guys accountable, but that this is the one thing that Stearns has done really well since coming here. He has really bulked up this what's it
Farm
called,
system.
this farm system, and just the amount of prospects. I mean, just seeing how quickly Carson Bench is ascending through the minor leagues. And I mean, he tore up single A in Brooklyn, which notoriously for left-handed hitters, because of how the currents and the winds, that's notoriously a tough place for left-handed hitters to flourish. He went in there, he flourished, went up to Binghamton in Double A, completely was destroying the ball up there, had over 1,000 OPS. And I mean, he's up there right now in Triple A, already 22 years old in Triple A. And at a small sample size, 4 games, and I think what he gets like a 625 OPS. So I'm sure the more games he gets under his belt there, we'll see his numbers start to go up. But it's so nice to see that the farm system looks a lot more better than it has over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, Benj is like ascending as a top prospect in all of baseball. Like, not even just in the Met system. Like, there's legitimate hype about him being one of the 10 to 20 best prospects in all of baseball. And he was just drafted last year. So there's still so much room for growth, which is what is insane about it. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. It's like there's all this criticism, like you said, of David Stearns. And, some of it's justifiable with certain things. But, the one thing you cannot critique him for, and the one thing you have to give him his flowers for, is that this farm system, and it's, again, only a year and a half into his regime, and this farm system is already miles ahead that it's ever been under any previous regimes. So think about what it's going to be down the road when you're really replenishing these guys over and over again. And then all of a sudden, that's when you have the conversation, because everyone talks about how, oh, well, the Mets need to start acting like the Dodgers. You have Steve Cohen, who has all this money, but you're not acting like the Dodgers, because it takes time to build that, because you need the deep farm system to get there. And you have that deep farm system, then all of a sudden you could talk about this team being like the Dodgers. And that's something that, we talked about in the offseason when everyone was talking about, sign an ace, sign an ace. You can't do that until you have a deep prospect pool, because you need to have prospects fill out the rotation, or at least part of it. You can't just go out there and spend all of your money on your entire roster. It's just unrealistic to do. And once you have these prospects coming that are going to be cheap, that's why I was saying you could go sign a frontline starter. I talked to you in the car about this, but like, Scooble's a free agent after next season, and the Mets are going to have money coming off the books with pitchers, and these young guys are going to start to come in. If you could save money with these young guys flourishing, that gives you the flexibility to actually go out and get a Scooble, because you're not spending all this money on, filling out your rotation with kind of these middle end starters, like I talked about before with Manaya, Sanga, Holmes, and all these guys. You actually have the room to go out and do that. So yeah, it just takes time to build there. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this is obviously true that hopefully Chavez is gone by the time guys like Benj are ready, but that's neither here nor there.
No, yeah, 100%. I mean, but again, that is the benefit of being a team that develops your own guys, and being one of the top, organizations that develop prospects, because like we said, these guys come up, they're young, They're controllable. They have many years of arbitration, and you're going to get them on cheap contracts. And then, like I said, even if some of the guys don't necessarily crack this lineup, like what the Dodgers do, like what we've seen the Padres with the last couple of years, you end up flipping these guys for higher end prospects. I mean, like we saw with the Padres this year at the deadline. They took the number three, prospect in all baseball in DeVries, flip him for Mason Miller to make their bullpen deeper. And then, like we've seen with the Dodgers, with them trading for all these stars, and I mean, you look at them at the 2021 deadline where they go out there and they acquire both Max Scherzer and Trey Turner in the deal. Like, eventually, this is what we hope that the Mets will be able to do at like trade deadlines and that offseason. Because, like I said, it's nice to have Cohen's money, and that's also a big factor because you're able to bring in guys like Juan Soto, which we saw over this past offseason. But the other way to bring in top quality players, because it's not always a guarantee that some of these guys are going to hit free agency. I mean, prime example, like we saw with Mookie Betts, the Red Sox were looking to offload him after the 2019 season, and what did the Dodgers do? They said, oh, they called up Boston and said, listen, we want Mookie Betts, traded them prospects, and even when you look at the prospects they gave up, what the highest rated prospect in that deal was Alex Verdugo. And what is Alex Verdugo now these days? He's a fourth outfielder at best for the Atlanta Braves. So, having that depth and having that quality in your farm system, it definitely does help. And then, they ended up trading for Mookie Betts, signed into extension, and, simulated a couple years later, and they have two World Series championships under their belt. So, listen, like we said with Stearns, does he deserve some criticism for this year? Absolutely, but you can't criticize him at all for the farm system, because so far in a short tenure, and in just 1.5 years being here, the farm system looks so much better than it has been over the past decade.
Yeah. Again, like it's just so nice to see. It really is. Uh, but let me see if there's yeah with the Alvarez thing. He's undergoing an MRI. So we'll see how that transpires. There was a comment that I did start kind of relating to the starting pitching from Hornet before. Is pitching beyond 5 innings down to mental strength or bad execution on pitches causing high pitch counts? I think there's a mix of both there because, we talked about at times with Peterson how I feel like a lot of it with him is kind of more mental because we've seen him give the length, but there's also, I think, this mental roadblock. Like, I can't mess up because this offense is not performing enough, which, it's been a bit better, the offense as of lately, but we still need to see more. But I think some of that. But then with Clay Holmes, it's like we talked about at nauseum how he is not utilizing his arsenal to its full potential. And last night, maybe, him or Hefner's listening to the Mets Central podcast. I don't know, but we talked about at nauseum how, Clay needs to adjust and actually deepen the arsenal, and it's going to get him by in these starts. And, I was very happy to see last night the sinker, which we talked about how he threw like 51 or 56, whatever the number was
58.
last time. What was it?
58.
58 last time. Yeah. Cut back to 28 and then threw the sweeper 26 times. Like, he actually started to utilize his full arsenal a bit more, which, what do you know? He gave one of his better starts in a long time. Obviously, still needs to be a bit better, but it's still just good progression there from a guy that was not utilizing the arsenal to his full potential.
Yeah, that's one of the things, and I brought it up yesterday on the postgame show, but that's one of the things I want credit Clay Holmes on, because it's not a surprise that when Clay Holmes utilizes more of his arsenal, he looks a lot more of a better pitcher, and like the pitcher that we saw earlier in the year. Because, like I said, like because listen, Holmes is a good pitcher, and I brought this up before. Holmes is good stuff, but he doesn't have good enough stuff just to throw one or two pitches consistently. Like, you have to open up more of your arsenal more, and like that, and that's what he did. And that's what he did yesterday. Because, like you said, through the sinker 58 times in the Braves start, cut that to 28. Through the changeup only 11 times in that start against the Braves. Up that to 18. Through the sweeper, slash slider, only about, what was it only here? I only threw it 11 times in the Brave start. And then you compare it to the start last night where he threw the sweeper slider about 35, 36 times. So like I said, with Holmes, it's just all about opening up more of his arsenal. And like I said, yes, do you want to see him, go and give you a little bit more length? Absolutely. He did kind of get screwed over a little bit in that fourth inning just because Lindor should have made that easy play on the Jorge Polanco hit where it's like, and listen, I get it. It was a little bit of a high ball, but like I brought up yesterday, for Lindor's quality and for the amount of money he's being paid for, that's a play he should be making. And listen, if Lindor was able to record that out, maybe Holmes was able to at least start the sixth inning. Who knows? But at least it was nice to see that Holmes, like I said, he didn't exactly give you the length that we all wanted to, but at least the quality of the start looked better. He wasn't getting into as much trouble, because really, apart from that fourth inning, Holmes really didn't really get into, any of the trouble. The only thing I will say though, again, I would like to see him cut back a little bit more on 3-2 counts because I feel that's something that he still does way too much with the 3-2 counts, and that's part of the reason why his his pitching numbers, or at least his pitch counts gets such high in these starts. But yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to credit with Holmes was he expanded the arsenal and his start looked a lot better yesterday.
Yeah, and then, just to address the other starters and the staff, like Manai, I just think is simply not healthy. Like it's clear that he's pitching through an injury. The velo is just not there at all. And then outside of that, I mean, talked about Peterson, talked about Holmes. McLean gave you more than 5 innings, so good start so far there. And then Senga, they were talking about on the broadcast in his last start how they felt that he was trying to, hide some of his best stuff for too late in starts, and it was causing him to get beat early. And, we saw the adjustment and he looked better in that last start. So we'll see if he builds on it. That's the most important part. So some of it's a bit of both, in my opinion, just to, fully summarize the answer to that question.
No, yeah, 100%. Hopefully, because that's something that we criticized on last podcast about, Hefner not making some of these adjustments, and hopefully now if these pitchers are starting to finally make that adjustment and they start giving you some length, hopefully that lessens up less pressure on the bullpen. But still, like I said, the offense does contribute. They still have to, be consistent. They still have to bring in, runners score position. That's the most important factor because we saw early in the season where the pitching staff was carrying them, the offense not so much, and then ultimately we start to see injuries pile up. We start to see guys get fatigued, and then we saw how the rotation has fallen off over these past 2.5 months. So hopefully, with some of these adjustments being made, hopefully we start to see. And listen, would I like to see the rotation get back to what they were, in the first 2-3 months of the season? Absolutely. But if they could just, have any semblance of what they were and be at least, more reliable in terms of innings given, I will gladly take that from this pitching staff.
Yeah. And, like we talked about last episode with this, it felt like his Atlanta start, he was the last start, felt more like a starting pitcher start. So it's encouraging. But do you have anything else to talk about this series before I bring up a conversation that I want to, just because of something from last night?
No, we could talk about, or I have a feeling what we're going to talk about now, but yeah, we could shift to that.
Oh, you know exactly what we're going to talk about because I am just so annoyed about this whole shit. By the way, we have news that Bench just got placed on
Yeah.
the 7-day IL, so that's unfortunate as we're talking about him, but nonetheless, so Rob Manfred was on the broadcast yesterday. And they were talking about certain things with, the league, potentially changes that are coming and everything. And Rob Manfred basically hinted at a change to the divisions and realigning them to have more rivalries and stuff or create new rivalries, whatever his reasoning was. All I could say is that why? Like that's all I'm going to ask is why. So you're telling me that it's better for baseball to real because if I was to make an assumption right now about the Mets how the division would look if they realigned it for the Mets, um, I'd imagine that it's going to be the Mets, Phillies, Yankees, Red Sox, and Blue Jays maybe as that fifth team in the division if they realigned it. All I could ask is how is that better? So you're telling me that all of a sudden, oh, the Braves and Marlins, they're going to be just great rivals. You're going to take away rivalries like the Mets and Braves. And then what about teams in like the NL West? I mean, are you going to split up the Giants and Dodgers from that division? Because that's a good rivalry. I just don't understand why you would mess with something that is so good. What? Because now we have the universal DH. We could realign the divisions. And I think his reasoning was because of travel and stuff. So let me get this straight. So the same commissioner that allowed the change for the schedule that every team plays each other throughout the season and less divisional matchups. Now you're telling me that, oh, it's less travel. Why did you not just keep the schedule as is with the division matchups then if you care about the travel so much? Why'd you cut back on that and make it that every team plays each other? So spare me with the whole, oh, the travel reasons. It would be less wear and tear. They go back to the old schedule. That's my solution. If you really care about that, go back to the schedule where the Mets and Phillies are playing each other. What was it, like 20 something times throughout the year? Instead of whatever it is now, where it's like 16 or something. Spare me that garbage. That would be so horrible if they do that. They're going to do it. I shouldn't even say if. They're going to do it. But that, to me, that is just absolutely stupid.
No, it's hypocritical because like you talk about, if the whole point of this, whole realignment, this whole divisional realignment is to cut back on travel, then like you said, why make the schedule like it is now where every team plays each other? It just doesn't make any sense. And listen, I've been a fan of some of the changes that the MLB has made over the past couple years. I like the implementation of the universal DH. I like the fact that every team plays each other now. I like the expanded playoffs. I am a fan of potential expansion as well. I think I would like to see like two more teams come into the league as well. I do not like though the whole division realignment thing. I just don't. I think because with baseball, it's you want to preserve some part of the history. And listen, if you're getting rid of the pitcher hitting in the National League, you're adding more playoff teams. I think the one most important factor that you want to keep in terms of baseball history is the National League and the American League, because that's the origin of baseball here. That's the origin of Major League Baseball here. Here in America. And I mean, just getting rid of those two leagues after all the history of Major League Baseball, to me, I don't like it. Because what I imagine happening is they're just going to end up going to like an Eastern Western Conference thing, like we see in the NHL and the NBA. Which again, I don't like it. I like the way the divisions are now. I like the rivalries that are in place now. I like the fact that the Mets and the Yankees could potentially play in a World Series against each other, because if they end up doing these new divisional realignments, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. Which I know maybe some people don't care about, but I mean, it's from the rivalry standpoint and being able to match up in the World Series, for me that is a cool standpoint. But I don't like it at all. You have for me to just keep some semblance of the history of Major League Baseball, and getting rid of the National League and the American League and just putting together all these new divisions. I don't like them at all.
Yeah, I don't understand how, again, when you're already playing every team to begin with, and if you do an Eastern and Western Conference, how is that changing anything? Like, to me, that's what I'm trying to understand. Also, it's like you still play every team, so it's not going to cut back on travel or anything, and in my opinion, it ruins what the Subway Series is right now. Like, I think it's nice how it's, twice a year and there's a special feeling behind that. To me, I prefer it that way. I think it's, special when, the Dodgers and Angels rarely meet up. It makes it have a little bit more meaning. Not that the Angels are any good, but you get the point where I don't know. To me, it ruins the entire point of that. And okay, if you're gonna go to Eastern and Western conferences, again, like how are you splitting that entire thing up? To me, that's also what I'm wondering there. I don't know. To me, it's so ridiculous that they're even considering this. Nonetheless, I mean, again, they're going to do it. It just so obvious that they're going to do it. Um, it just feels like one of those things where in the next CBA, that's going to be one of the things that they actually might agree upon, the players and the owners. Which I hate it, but it's going to be what it is, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's gonna happen eventually. That's something we can't stop. Unfortunately, I mean, the whole CBA talks, which you know, when the next CBA is up, there's not even a guarantee that we'll even have a baseball season after that year because of the whole salary cap debacle, which just is another garbage thing to talk about. And I don't even want to bring that up because you don't need a salary cap in this league. The way the payrolls and the way the financials work in this league, I'm totally fine with. The problem is the cheap owners who don't want to spend any money on their teams, like with the Pirates, like with the Reds, and some of the other teams around the baseball, like the Marlins and the Rays, for example. That's just, but again, that's a whole nother discussion point. But we'll see what happens with the next CBA talks.
And if you're saying ratings, okay, I don't see how that's improving the ratings beyond like the first year or two of it. Like, yeah, the first year or two, it might boost the ratings because there's some excitement for new rivalries or whatever. But once it becomes the norm, it's going to be what it is now, where it's like, okay, the Mets and Yankees are actual rivals now since they're in the same division. I don't think it's going to change anything too much in that regard. I at least don't see it changing anything that much. Like at some point, Mets Yankees is going to be like Mets Braves.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, I don't see how this changes.
And like you said, for the first 1, 2, 3 years, I could definitely see the ratings go up a bit, but eventually over a certain amount of time, it's just gonna go back to the ratings that what they are right now. And I mean, even for like Mets and Yankees, like realistically, I don't think anyone cares about that rivalry aside from actual people that live in New York. Like I don't think people from Los Angeles care about the Subway Series.
No.
I just don't see it. So the ratings and the excitement around the Subway Series will always be high in New York specifically, but around the country, I don't see that excitement level reaching a whole new thing. Like the only way the excitement would reach an all new high, like I said, is if the Mets and Yankees play in the World Series, which again, if we eventually realign, that's not going to be able to happen anymore because they'll be in the same division. So they won't be able to, to play each other in the World Series.
Yeah, and I mean this too. Revenge would also be nice. See, the only positive though I would say is getting away from the Dodgers would be nice. That's the one positive I could take away from it is that you'd at least get away from the Dodgers. But again, like to me, it just like you said, no one gives a rat's ass about the Subway Series outside of New Yorkers. The same way we don't give a shit about Angels Dodgers. We don't care about the Freeway Series. Do we care about the White Sox and Cubs playing each other? I don't know what their rivalry name is, but like, do any of us give a fuck about that? No. Like, no one cares outside of that. I just, again, I don't understand it. I think it's cool that, you have kind of these unnatural rivalries that you have right now. Like, again, the Mets and Braves, because they're in the same division. I think it's cool that you have that kind of rivalry there that, you wouldn't have if they realigned the divisions. So,
Yeah.
all I could say, though, is that when they do this, holy crap, it is going to be just that division between the Mets. I don't know who the fifth team is. That's going to be the Polar Bear in Arlington, Texas, in this division. But between Mets fans, Yankees fans, Phillies fans, and Red Sox fans, it is going to absolutely be fucking hell between those four fan bases
Oh,
fighting with each other.
that's a cancerous division on Twitter. Yeah,
Oh,
because
I'm gonna have to hate Cutter as king. Like, I don't want
yeah,
to do that.
yeah, that's the only thing. That's the only thing I was going to bring up. It's like it sucks the fact that we would lose the Red Sox as a nice little ally because I like the Red Sox. I don't have a problem with them, and then the Mets are going to have to end up being in the same division with them. It's going to be like, now we got to end up fighting a Red Sox fan. It's like,
I don't want to
especially with
hate Cutter, man. I don't. That would suck. Ah, yeah, I don't know. I don't like this at all. I don't like even thinking about it. But again, it's once the next CBA kicks in, if they resolve it, which they will at some point, but like when they resolve it, because I think there's going to be a lockout. This is what the change is going to be. It's really inevitable at this point. I'd imagine that the divisions are going to be. I mean, I wonder if the divisions are going to be kind of what it was in 2020 to a degree, where they had the East more and, like you said, the Central West kind of vibe there. I don't know. I guess we'll see how they work that out, but just I hate it. I really hate it a lot.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would imagine if when they ultimately do this realignment, I think that's going to end up with them expanding. So I think they'll bring in two more teams to expand it to 32 teams, and then probably if they do Western and Eastern, they'll probably do 16 West, 16 East, and then depending on how they want to do divisions, you could maybe see maybe you see like NHL two divisions of 8, or maybe you see 4 divisions of 4. I don't exactly know how they're gonna do it, but
well, they have 30 though instead of 32, so that unless they're expanding,
no, yeah, no,
or
that's
that's
what I
what you were
said.
saying.
That's
Okay,
what I said.
sorry. I
think
I
I
lost.
think yeah,
Sorry,
I
I zoned
think
out.
that when they do the realignment, I think we'll see 2 new teams added as well.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I got
Yeah.
distracted by a text, but yeah. I mean, if they that would also make sense. I mean, we've heard about potentially expanding, whether it's another team in Florida, whether it's Nashville getting a team, and then somewhere out west. If I don't know if Oakland gets a team back, whatever it might be. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
mean,
might
yeah, I mean, there are certain cities. I mean, Nashville's been discussed. Um, I believe Charlotte's been discussed.
Charlotte,
Maybe,
Orlando. Those are like the
yeah,
East
maybe
Coast.
maybe you put a team back in Montreal. You bring back the Expos. I don't know. We'll see what happens though.
Maybe we get a I don't know team like a Western Canadian team. I don't know something.
Winnipeg.
Winnipeg gets a team. Who knows? But yeah, all I know is that you know these things are just inevitable, and it's unfortunate. That's all it is. But outside of that, I think that's really all we have to discuss. The Mets play the Nationals this upcoming series, and everyone remember that weird start times in the series. We got a couple 6:45s, which sure I don't get why, but sure. And then there's a 4:05 on that Thursday game. In terms of the pitching matchups, if I could pull that up real quick. Um, let's see if I can get this up quickly. There we go. All right. So Peterson versus Irvin in game number 1. Game number 2, we got Senga versus Lord. And then in the last game, it is Mania versus Gore. A little bit of a lefty ace off there. Uh, you got to win the series. The Nationals stink. Um, just build on what you did in this series. That's all I asked for. It's really all I could ask for.
Yeah, listen. Ideally, I would love them to go into DC and sweep them, considering how poorly the Nationals have played over the last couple months. But again, the Mets have played poorly over the last couple months as well. So, listen, like I said, I would love a sweep, but just go in there, take 2 out of 3, and then build off momentum. Because even then, like I know we talk about how Truist Park is a house of horrors for the Mets. The Mets typically are always due for one bad loss whenever they go to DC as well. So, and again, we saw that in the last series where the Mets played the Nationals in DC, and over there they had 2 bad losses over there. So, but hopefully they go in there, they play good baseball, they build off the momentum they just had against the Mariners, and like I said, win this series, take 2 out of 3, and then we'll go on from there.
Yep. Just again, build on what you did. So thank you everyone for tuning in, watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. Turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live next. And we'll see you guys in the next one.